In this video, I'm going to show you how to make really cool stuff with a wood lathe. We're going to show you how to plan out what you want and then how to implement what you planned. We're going to go through some of the basic tools and some of the basic techniques on how to make these projects. And when you're done, you'll have a beautifully polished, lathed part. Well, let's get started. It's best if you start with a perfectly square, rectangular block of wood. You'll cut an X on one side of the wood so the lathe will securely hold the wood. Then we'll take a large gouge and start to make this square block round. You'll want to make sure there's 1/8 of an inch and no more than 1/4 of an inch between your tool rest and your wood piece. Periodically, you're going to have to take the tool rest and move it in to make sure there's a smaller gap. Then keep working this square block with the big gouge until we have a round cylinder. Keeping your tool sharp is an absolute must. This large gouge is probably one of the most used lathe tools. It's used for rough cutting, and there's an awful lot of that. When you think you've got everything perfectly round, you can lay this gouge on the top and feel to see if it's vibrating or not. We can feel a little bit of vibration, so we'll just keep going. Periodically, you'll need to put a little oil here to keep it running smooth. Here's that technique again to see if it's flat and smooth. If you feel the vibration, it's not there yet. But when we turn the lathe off, you can definitely see we're getting closer. Just back and forth on this gouge a few more times and we'll have it. Now when we run the back of the gouge on the part, it feels smooth. Because it is smooth, now we'll introduce a few more tools. Here's the caliper. It's used to get the right diameter. Here's a smaller gouge for helping out with some of the contours. And a smaller gouge for those real tight contours. This lathe tool is called a skew. This is probably the second most used tool out of any of the lathe tools. You'll really be able to work the contours with this one. This next tool isn't a necessity, but boy is it nice for getting those contours exactly the way you want them. So with the lathe running and a pencil, we'll put our starting point. We want to make sure we don't get too close to the lathe chuck. So now on this piece of paper, we're going to go ahead and start drawing to scale half of the profile that we want to make. Now as we draw in scale, we're going to start to project lines onto the actual part itself. If you draw an outward round projection, we call these beads. Each one of these beads you measure in the center. Once we have a design that we like and we project these measurements onto our actual part, we'll use a caliper to ensure that we get the actual diameters that we want. Now that we have our design, we're going to set our calipers to double our design because of course when we drew it, we only drew half. This next tool is called a parting tool. With the use of the calipers, you're going to take these pencil lines and get these to the correct depth or the diameter that is specified on your drawing. So once you have this tool set to the right diameter, you use your parting tool until you feel the correct diameter. See, right about here, that's it. So we'll go ahead and take the pencil lines and go ahead and project these outer diameters with the caliper and the parting tool. So you can go ahead and get your groove started and then move your caliper into place, and as soon as you feel it slip in, there it is, you've got the right diameter. Just continue this process until all the peaks of these beads are marked in. So there's a little bit of a learning curve to just about anything. So just take your time, and especially with this, you want to go less pressure than more pressure. As your skills increase, you can start to add a little bit more pressure, but most of this is very delicate work. For safety, you want to make sure that your tool rest is no less than 1/8 of an inch and no more than 1/4 of an inch, because if the gap gets too big, your tool can fling down and the handle can come right at you. It's a lot better if you can learn from this advice than to learn by actually having it happen to you. So we just used the skew to kind of start to shape, and now we just take the gouge and start to remove a lot more of the material. For a lot of the shaping, these are the two major tools that you'll be using to make your contours. If you remove any material from the back end, just make sure you know where your chuck is so you don't hit it. So now with the skew, we're going to start carving in our first bead. So just rotate your skew back and forth and form the peaks and valleys of that bead. Just a reminder, when you're getting close to that chuck, just make sure you know where you're at and where the chuck's at. Another tool that you can make would be these radius gauges. You can drill a hole, and this helps you get the right shape. A pencil can help remind you where your parameters are so you don't go too far with your profile. We put this pencil line in on the peak or the center of this next bead. So notice how we're not cutting off the pencil, because this is going to be the top of our bead. So it helps us know where we're at while forming this next bead. Now, the further you get away from your tool rest, the more careful you want to be, because you do not want the tool to be thrust downward. So we'll continue just working this larger bead with the small gouge. Then we'll switch back to the skew just to hone in these details. Then if you need to hog out a lot more material, this is where that big gouge comes back into play. We use this all the time. Now, if you really want to flatten it up, that's when this big skew comes into play. Next, we're going to take our parting tool and our caliper, and we're going to form a low point of one of the beads. So we want the low point to be a specific diameter. So we have our caliper set for that, and we'll just run it in until you feel it. Then we'll start to form that bead with our trusty skew. Once you get the hang of it, it's kind of fun, very relaxing. So you can form the inside and the outside of this bead with this skew. So those are a lot of the basics of how to use the tools. Now we're going to pull the tool rest off, and we're going to clean it up and sand it and polish it. It's extremely important to remove the tool rest. You do not want to get caught between the tool rest and the workpiece. I like the work behind the workpiece. That way I can see the front and how shiny the wood is getting. You can experiment with different kinds of sandpaper and different techniques to make sure each part is sanded evenly so everything shines. So when we turn it off, you can see this looks really nice. Here's a handy tool if you needed to make one exactly like the one you just did. It'll give you a perfect contour to work with. Spinning pieces like these is not a race. It's a labor of love. Well, I hope you have found this video useful, or at least entertaining. And if you did, please give the video a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.